If you are looking for the WNBA Author Talk with Nancy Jensen, you are in the right place. Okay. Yeah. Welcome to today's WNBA Author Talk. My name is Julie Frey, and I'm a member of the Women's National Book Association's Greater Philadelphia chapter, and I serve as the WNBA's Communications and Events Chair. We're so happy today to welcome Nancy Jensen to talk with us. Nancy is the author of 3 books, the 2020 Great Group Read Selection In Our Midst, which was our book club choice for this month, and the best-selling book, which was her first novel, The Three Sisters, The Sisters, which was chosen for the December 2011 Indie Next list. And then her first book was Windows, Stories and Essays, which was published in 2009. Her short stories and essays have been published in a variety of magazines and literary journals, and she teaches in the MFA program at the Bluegrass Writers Studio at Eastern Kentucky University. Nancy has also been the recipient of several fellowships and grants. Welcome, Nancy.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thanks for the book selection, for March. It's very exciting.
Well, we were so happy to be able to have you join us so close to when we did the book discussion. We did that yesterday.
So your friend, although you might be all talked out, which is
no, we're ready. We're ready.
Okay, cool.
A quick note to anyone who's joining on Zoom, you can feel free to write any questions you have in the Q&A. We will be getting to those. We'll be checking throughout the event and then at the end too. So keep the questions coming. So Nancy, to start us off, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Well, you just kind of gave that long. What always strikes me as funny is when my affiliation with the MFA program comes in. It's like it's so long. Bluegrass Writers Studio at Eastern Kentucky University. It's like, will this ever? Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the story of my life. I mean, I live in Kentucky. It looks like there's a thunderstorm coming. I live just alone with my pets. I don't know. What else? I never know what to say.
Sorry
to ask that question.
I'll get a little more specific. Besides reading and writing, do you have any hobbies?
Well, I love to read. Don't get as much time as I'd like to because I'm often reading for my classes, that I teach. Time with family, which of course has been, a difficult thing here. I cook. Not really.
I do keep yourself busy, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, I love movies, but I also love, my current obsession is streaming national theater.
Oh yes,
productions, national theater at home, because I love plays, and so yeah.
Oh, I love that. Yes. As I mentioned to Nancy before we started, I have a theater background, so I feel we're kindred spirits here. We like to read, we like to watch movies, we like theater. So I guess many people in the audience today probably enjoy the same sort of storytelling that we do. So it's a nice way that we can bond. Yeah,
I do love Broadway musicals too.
Do you have a favorite?
Oh golly. Well, I mean, I've probably now watched Hamilton 30 times. But before Hamilton, I love the Rodgers. I think I prefer Lerner and Lowe to Rodgers and Hammerstein, but actually, pretty much anything Candor and Ebb.
Oh yeah,
Cabaret, and it's just the intensity, the dark edginess of those. But it depends on the mood I'm in about whether I just want to fling into song or and I love Stephen Sondheim. I love Sondheim's work. So it did kind of, if I'm really feeling intellectual, I go to Sondheim. If I'm feeling sort of dark and edgy, it's Candor and Ebb. If I kind of want a mix, it's Lerner and Lowe. And then if I just want to fling it all away, it's Rodgers and Hammerstein. just be cheer,
Yep.
So sometimes I'll put those on just while I'm like doing housework and stuff, because
Oh,
I
it's
know
so
all this,
fun.
I know all the songs, and I sing them with abandon. Not well, but I sing with abandon.
Well, that's the important thing, that you have fun with it.
Yeah.
So during the pandemic, have you spent a lot of your time watching the movies and reading books, or have you been able to focus more on your writing? How has your pandemic been?
Well, it's been actually strange in that it's been fairly normal, because I teach a lot online anyway. And so, I've been teaching my classes, and those have been going on, and there's just always more work to do than I have time for with that. And so, I haven't actually had this year, I haven't really felt like I've had more time to do other things besides work. In fact, in some ways, it seems like there's less, because students have been more stressed. And so students are, coming, and asking for help and attention a little bit more than they normally would have.
That makes sense.
So yeah, and so yeah, I wish I had a great pandemic story, but I don't.
Oh, me too. I didn't learn how to bake sourdough bread. I didn't organize my basement. I didn't alphabetize anything. Like,
yeah, I mean, the only thing I did a January month declutter. I used this technique that I'd heard about, on Good Morning America or something, that you throw away, or you throw away or give away, set aside to give away, the number of items corresponding to the day of the month. And you do that for the whole month. And so by the end of the month, you've cleared like 500 things.
wow.
And I enjoyed that a lot.
Okay.
Because it was very
manageable. Horrible to me, but I'm
glad
you enjoyed it.
Well, but it was very manageable, because
Okay.
when I get into a kind of clearing frenzy, I mean, I'm just ruthless, and I'll just like, not even think, and just grabbing, and then inevitably I realize that I've gotten rid of things that I wanted or needed.
That's nice.
And so this was more manageable, and I found I get really excited the night before. It's like, I gotta get what are the 14 things I can discard tomorrow? And then sometimes I would get ahead by a couple of days, and but it just felt really good. But by the end of the month, I was ready to not do it again for a while. But I
can imagine that's a lot of things to clear out.
Yeah, but it does not,
every single one. What does this mean to me?
But it does not seem like a lot when you're doing it, just I mean, it was harder, obviously, when we're getting to the 27th and the 28th, but I was really generous with myself. Like, if I had a set of glasses and there were 5 glasses, that was 5 things. I didn't count it as a set. And so that made it easier. But it showed me I have not missed a single thing. I couldn't even tell you what I got rid of. That's how unimportant these things were.
Good for you. And think of all the space that you now have for more books.
Yes. Yes. But I did include some books.
Okay.
I did include some books. Now I gave those away. I didn't throw them away, but
not every book is meant to be kept forever by an individual. It's
right.
good to share the love.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And so, like you said, I cleared space.
Yep. Have you always been a reader?
Oh, yes. My grandma taught me to read when I was 3 years old. And, and I was so eager to do it. I mean, she would have taught me sooner if she could have, but she used my sister's first grade readers and taught me to read and write, because I would scribble at the table. I'd be with her, and I'd be scribbling and ask her if she could point out any letters in the scribble. And so she would always find something, always, no matter what and she'd say, well, that kind of looks like a B. And then she'd write the B, a B out for me, and she'd make a capital, and then she'd make a little B. And so every single time I would, I could learn letters. That's my grandmother had an 8th grade education, but she was the most natural teacher I've ever known. She was so intelligent in that way to be able to figure out how to make a game of something, to tap into the child's eagerness and then make a game of it. And she did this in all areas. She taught me, I learned how to clean house because I wanted to pretend and play Cinderella. And so I asked her to give me orders. And so, she'd say, Cinderella, do this, Cinderella, do that. And, so.
My mom's like that. She has that ability to just make any little thing fun. And watching my niece and nephews respond to that has been so much fun. Because like you said, like if you can make a little bit thing interesting, it really does connect and helps them to learn. And it's a nice little gift that your grandmother was able to give you. And that my mom was able to give.
Yeah. And then, when I was able to read, she would check out books for me on her library card. She had to prove to the library that I could read, because you weren't allowed to have a library card until you're 6 years old or something, first grade. And I was 4, and I was already reading, and so that I get teared up and I talk about it. But they said, well, we don't believe that she can read, and she just set me up on top of the desk at the library and said, get any book, just pull any book. And they put it in my hands because they were thinking, okay, well, she's just memorized, a book. And so they gave me the library card, and I had the run of the library. But, and what's really extraordinary about this, my grandmother was extremely shy. I mean, almost to the point of being agoraphobic.
Okay.
But she did that for me.
For you. Yeah.
I wrote about that. There's an essay that's a part of in my first book, Window. It's a passage that, I've tried to read that in public and I can't because I start to cry. But I think my sister inherited this. I've seen her with her grandson. And just the way that, everything becomes an opportunity to learn something.
Yeah. It's amazing watching people who have that ability.
Yeah.
Because it's just there's a magic to it.
It is. Yeah, there is definitely.
When I was 6, I think is when I got my library card, and I remember it vividly. But I was like the normal age. You were very progressive.
Well, I was just so proud of it, and because they were the old embossed cards, because they had the
little metal thing.
And, taking it out to the car to show my grandfather, when we came out. And, but, it was also very practical for my grandmother because you could only check out so many books a week, and we could only go, she didn't drive, so we could only go once a week on Saturday when my grandfather could drive and do the errands. So, she didn't have anything to read because she would like get one book for herself and all the rest of them, would be for me.
My mom was not a reader. So I was able to use, as I got a little older, when I was like 8 or 9, I would have like the 10 book limit from my card, and then I'd just start using her card. So I take like 15 or 20 books home for a week.
Yeah, well, I remember something. I think I restrained myself, because I felt like Grandma needed to have her books too. But it was really hard, because I would just struggle about, which books to take. Not knowing I could get the one that I was leaving, I could get it the next time, but it was just kind of agony. And when I had one that was late, it was a new book and I didn't realize I could have it for less time. I remember being so embarrassed going in to pay the fine, and I was like apologizing to them, practically weeping, just like, I'm so sorry. I was like, if they had taken away my privileges, I would not have felt it. That was extreme because I felt so guilty, that I had kept the book so long.
but
and the woman behind the counter is like, it's 8 cents, honey. I mean, it's just like this was like every day to her. So she probably has a memory of dealing with this hysterical child.
Well, it's when you're at that age and you're taught this book has to be back by a certain time, like it's one of your first things of sense of responsibility that this book is under your protection, and you have an obligation to get it back so that some other kid can enjoy it too.
And to take perfect care of it. I mean, just, because I'd like to read outside, but I couldn't take the library books outside, because that something might happen to it,
Yep.
And so because I
understand.
just felt I was being entrusted with this incredible responsibility. It was a wonderful privilege.
I don't remember if this was the first time I asked my mom, but I remember asking her, why can I only get so many books? And she's like, well, a library is not just a repository for every book in the world. This library has a set number of books. And if something happens to one of those books, or if someone doesn't return the book, then someone else doesn't get to read it, or their experience is less because it's like a page is loose or something, and falls out, and then there's a missing page, but that nobody knows. So you go to read the book and there's a missing page. You wouldn't want to do that to a kid. So early on, having those lessons instilled, like, I am so anal about my books. I don't share my books. It's like one of the most selfish things I can think of, because it's such a gift to me, but I won't let anyone use them. When I shared a room with my sister, I made her sign out books from my side of the room.
I love that. I tried not to be that way, but then I had the experience of, lending books and just like never getting them back, or getting them back in horrible condition, or one time horror of horrors. I was already teaching, and this was a college student. And, when I finally asked for the book back, he said, I think it's on the floor of my car. Just like, I thought I would lose my mind. I almost, it was good that he was like heading out the door as he said it, because I might have done him bodily harm. And he was, but I had been so careful. It's like, oh, so-and-so, he's going to be so careful with my book. He's going to appreciate it so much, and I thought I had vetted him properly, but no. Not at all.
I did share one book. I had read a book the summer after fourth grade. And so I took it like the first day of school back to my fourth grade teacher. And I said, this is a really good book. You should read it to, other years of classes going forward. And she didn't return it for a long time. And then she appeared at my classroom door and said, Julie, come here. And I said, yes. And she's like, so there was an accident. And I accidentally dropped your book in a puddle. So here is a brand new copy. It just took me a little while to get it. And I'm like, I can handle that, because this time there's not a crease in it. There's like,
that's right.
I got a brand new book.
And she had it before she told you about the accident,
yes,
which I think is really, really key.
I agree. That's a good teacher.
Yeah. Well, because then you didn't have to, you didn't have to feel like you had pressured her to do the right thing and get you another one, which of course was exactly the right thing to do. But yeah. You didn't have to be the nice guy. It's like, oh, that's okay.
Right. Yeah. My 9-10-year-old self was protected. So shifting from reading, can you tell us about how you came to be a writer?
Well, I think it seemed to me a natural outgrowth, because I, was reading all the time. And, my siblings and I always, we grew up just always doing really imaginative play. We'd have these ongoing games, and we would role play. I remember, I'm sure we did all kinds of things, but, my favorite one was, we were the Monkees, the singing group, the Monkees. and we each had our favorite monkey. We were more into the Monkees than we were into the Beatles, you know, just because the Monkees had their cool TV show. And that was, you know, when we were, sorry.
Were you Davy?
No. My sister was Davy. No, I was Mickey. I loved Mickey the best, and I loved George the best in the Beatles. And so I was always Mickey, and my brother was Michael. And if we had somebody visiting, then they could be Peter. Or sometimes
Michael wore the hat, right?
Yeah. And so, yeah, you know, and actually even our Beatles sort of fell in along the same lines, you know, but we would just, we would make up games. Like, we wouldn't replicate what was on the TV show. We would, you know, decide on a song. Like, I remember I would be sitting on the edge of our grape arbor, you know, where the cistern was. And I would be Mickey, and Michael would come along and discover me as I was riding the last train to Clarksville, you know, and I would have this whole backstory about how I came to write that song. I'm sure I didn't even know what the song meant, you know? but I would just make it up. And so we did all that. And then, so, you know, when I got, you know, somewhere along in school, you know, obviously there'd be the little assignments and writing, and, but, you know, I just started doing it a lot and just writing stories, and it was a way to live out fantasies. You know, I wanted to live on a farm, and I wanted to have horses, and, you know, the things that most little girls want. And then it just kind of grew. You know, I had all of these crazy ideas. Like, believe me, I am not built like a jockey. I mean, I grew up in Southern Indiana and Louisville, right across the river, and Churchill Downs, and I loved horse racing, but because mainly I loved horses. But, you know, I had this dream of being a jockey. I wanted to be a jockey. I'd read all the Black Stallion books. You know, I was crazy for those, or a horse trainer. And so, you know, writing the stories was a way of kind of living out a fantasy. You know,
you were a daydream believer. Sorry,
I was a daydream believer. That was very good. That was very good. I sang that song a lot. Yeah, you know, just, you know, I think the combination, and then I started writing things down. My sister and I sometimes would write plays. You know, we were real fans of masterpiece theater. And so, you know, when we wanted to earn a little money, we'd write a little play, you know, based on, you know, like Elizabeth R. or the Six Wives of Henry VIII. And we would play it out, and we would play all the parts, and everybody had to pay like 10 cents a reporter to watch our play. And so, yeah, just kind of one thing led to another. I would say it was maybe around the time I was probably in 6th grade or so, when I realized I probably wasn't going to get to be a sea captain. But that if I would put it in stories, I could be anything. Yeah. Which is really weird, because I'm a realistic writer. I mean, you'd think that, you know, this was the birth of like a fantasy writer or a speculative writer, but no.
One thing, for those of you who haven't read Nancy's books, her 2 novels do have historical fiction elements to them. And so maybe for you, because I'm just extrapolating, you can totally correct me here. The fact that you could combine something like being in a different place or being in a different time is a way that you fed that imaginative thing, rather than making up different planets and different.
Oh yeah, absolutely. To kind of see myself into it. And, but, you know, I will tell you a funny story, which is, it should be embarrassing, but I think it's more funny than embarrassing. When first, you know, an early time, like after the Sisters came out, and, you know, I mean, it's the Sisters starts in 1927 and goes, you know, to, you know, it's 80 years, I guess. I don't know, 2000. I can't remember actually where it stops. That's what I'm thinking of, but it goes to contemporary time. And somebody said, well, so, what was the experience of writing an historical novel? And I cried out about this. It's not an historical novel. And then I realized how stupid that sounded. It's like, okay, I am not 90 years old. I really am not. But I tell you, the reason that it did not feel like that is because, my grandmother told me all the stories of her childhood. And it's not that the stories are in there, but I felt like I knew the world and I knew the realm, and I knew, I had a sense of the historical backdrop, of the larger events. And so, I imagined my way into the lives of people who would have been my grandmother's age. I mean, it's a little, I'm monkey with the time a little bit. But, I knew some of the objects, that just anchored the place. And so I felt like I'd sort of lived through my grandmother's generation and my mother's generation through stories that she would tell. And then, of course, my own. So it didn't feel historical to me in the way that In Our Midst definitely is, because that was real research. Lots and lots and lots of research.
Well, let's continue a little bit with the sisters. Can you tell us what it's about?
Well, it's, as I said, it covers, about 80 years. It's 3 generations interlocking the lives of sisters. But the core of it is, or at the core of it, are sisters in 1927, 14-year-old Bertie and her sister Mabel, who are separated as a result of a really terrible misunderstanding, a really terrible one. Bertie, Bertie's 14, she's graduating from the 8th grade that day, and her sister disappears, and so does Bertie's boyfriend. And as a result of this breach, I mean, there's more dark stuff in it, but I don't want to give it away. But as a result of this breach, the sisters are completely split apart and don't reconnect. Mabel makes efforts, to find her sister, but when the mail, comes to Bertie, she's still that really deeply wounded 14-year-old girl. And so she burns the letters, or she returns one that says deceased on it. And this was actually born from a family, from a family secret, that my grandmother had a sister that she just didn't own at all. I mean, she didn't, we never talked about her. And I was maybe 10 years old when I found out about this sister, because a letter arrived saying that she had died. But there was this silence around it. My sister had found out about it, and she shoved me in a room, and she said, this is why grandma's upset, but we can't talk to her about it. You can't say anything. And I was persuaded by several family members that if I even asked my grandmother a question about it, she would have a nervous breakdown.
Wow.
And I didn't want her to have a nervous breakdown. And so I didn't. And so, there was just nothing. I mean, a few photographs, but we just didn't talk about it. And there were a couple of, stories about the sister that sort of filtered down through family legend. But I wanted to find out, I wanted to explore what would happen across the generations if if a sister just made the decision to erase the other from existence. What would be the ripple effect through the generations? And so the story covers, Bertie's family and, her daughters, and Mabel's family. She has a daughter that she's adopted. And, because I kind of I was interested in what happens to people's lives when there's a secret that they don't even know about.
Yeah.
How would it affect Bertie as a mother? What kind of a mother would that make her? And then in turn, what kind of mother would that make her daughters? Because her daughters had been raised with something really held back, a deep wound at the center. There's a kind of closing in, like what does that cost them? So it's sisters through the generations. It's, six point of view characters.
6 characters is a lot. How did you keep them straight, and how did you figure out where you wanted them to fit, and how to determine which ones get this amount of time? Or that's
it was a challenge. But I had prior to that, I didn't even know, I wasn't even sure for a while that I was writing a novel. I thought I might be writing a series of short stories. But I think my training and experience in writing short stories worked in this way, because I wound up, I get a really strong sense of one of the particular characters in, whatever generation she was a part of, and I would have a sense of something happening to her in a scene. So each of the chapters is one of the sisters, or one of the women. And they are ordered chronologically, so the later generations don't come in. I had started kind of weaving it, and it was just, I was trying to explain to a writer friend of mine, how I was going to frame it and go back and forth in time. And she said, I'm confused just with you telling me this. Please don't do that. So I didn't. And so, that helped manage it too, because it's chronological. But the episodic nature of it allowed me to make leaps of years, and there wouldn't be so many years between any one chapter, but since it would be a different character, for that particular character, who was the point of view character, it might have been, a decade or more since she'd had a voice. But and of course with Birdie has 2 daughters and then 2 granddaughters. And so she features, she and, all those family members feature in most of those chapters in some way. And so it's really Mabel. Mabel's the one I really had to keep track of, because, although she has a daughter, her daughter doesn't have a point of view in the book. So, yeah, but that came together really chaotically. And so I just wrote what I would focus on, a chapter the episode that seemed intense to me, that needed to be written. And it wasn't until I probably had 3/4 of them before I really laid them out and said, okay, where are the gaps? What character hasn't been heard from, or what period hasn't been dealt with? And then, writing more chapters, coming up with some scenario. And I mean, it wasn't easy. It sounds easy as I say it. And then, then of course I had to, make the chapter, I had to make sure that allusions to earlier events were in later chapters. And, so.
Did you find, did you work through one character for a while and then come back, or did you kind of take each time period and work through that at the same time?
It was pretty random. Often I would write, a couple, maybe 2, sometimes at most 3 chapters for one character. But then I would go to another, but I might not be writing those in chronological order. I might just be dropping down into the life, and it'd be really intense. And during that, I would realize, say something else happened, because at the same time, all of their their other relationships were developing. The men in their lives, and it's like, who's that? How did they get together? How did they get together? And so then I have to go back and think about it. But yeah, it was really just like when I began to see something and it was really vivid, then I could write that. And so yeah, I didn't, like I said, for a long time, I didn't worry about, how many chapters there were going to be. I never worried about whether the number of chapters per point of view were equal. I still don't know. I'd have to go back and count. But
not every character needs to be equal, because some
no
more of a story that needs to be told that takes longer.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think, Bertie and Mabel are roughly, but, because, I mean, and there are more chapters for them just because of the,
The length.
where they sit on the timeline. But it was a very different process. I mean, it didn't teach me how to write a novel because I had to write Intermezzo in a very different way.
Can you quickly tell people about Intermist, and then I want to hear how you had to write Intermist?
Yeah, well, it's the story of a German American family who are interned in the United States during World War II. And they're separated as a result of this internment. They're interned as alien enemies. The language of the arrest order would say they were potentially dangerous to the security of the United States. No evidence, no explicit evidence, and just put away and separated and far flung. And so it's really the story of, how this ordinary family is caught up in this nightmare, that they don't know what's going to happen to them when they're arrested and when they're separated. And so they're just trying to hold their family together in any way they can to preserve the integrity of their family. But at the same time, having to reckon with how this changes their relationship to the country they had chosen to call their home, and that they had chosen and that they wanted to come to and make a life in. So, yeah.
So how was the process different between the two books?
Well, the first one was, of course, I realized, that it was going to just take an enormous amount of research. And so, the kind of research I did for the sisters was reminder research. Like, I think I know what this was, and I'd check on it. And then sometimes I discover new things, and then that would spur the story. But I knew I needed to, there hasn't been a lot written about this. I mean, this is really truly an unknown chapter in American history, or a forgotten chapter, deliberately covered up in a lot of ways. And so, I am grateful to the scholars. There's scholar Stephen Fox, who did oral interviews. I think I've referenced that book in at the end in the historical note. Mm-hmm. And so I got to know the voices. And then there's the German American Attorney Coalition website, also some oral histories that had been taken down, or people had written. I say oral histories. I mean, sometimes they were recorded, but they sometimes they just wrote and then submitted. So there was the research part of it and trying to figure all that out. But I found that I absolutely had to write this book chronologically. I had I knew the opening even before I had done all of the research, because it's the day of the attack on Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
But I just had to crawl along. And I couldn't project, what a scene was going to be or anything else further on in the book. I mean, I was quite a ways along before I knew. I had a sense of what was going to happen to the family, but I didn't know it. And so, but I didn't even know like which of the camps the individual characters were going to go to.
Okay.
And so I just really crept along with it, and continue to do research along the way, like because I had created my timeline of when, the ousts were being arrested. Mm-hmm. And so then I had to keep making sure, okay, was that, what were the conditions in that camp at that time? Mm-hmm. What could happen to them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
With the research, were you able to talk to any survivors?
Not until after.
Really?
Yeah. And I think I could have if I had requested it. But I did not want to be beholden to any one particular person's story. I read so many stories. There's such a variation in experience that I wanted to get as much of that experience in as possible through various characters, through my characters. But I wanted the freedom to discover who my people were and just find the situations that they would be in or potentially be in. But I needed to know who they were with what they would do in that situation. So there's always a research element, a factual element about like where they are or things that happen in the camp. There's at least, some evidence to things, to the big events that are happening. Not that it's a direct, transcription of those events or anything, but, possible. But then I had to work with the characters as I had come to develop them. And so, I made that choice, not to treat it like it was an actual history, and talk to individuals about their experience and then try to make them characters, even under another name. But a little over a year ago, when we were getting some advanced readers copies out, I could reconstruct it, but it would take a while. But I got, I came into a correspondence with Art Jacobs, who actually wound up blurbing the book. He wrote, yes, and he is actually, I found, I knew that he had put together the Freedom of Information Times website. And so he actually emailed me when he heard about the book, and we started corresponding. This really lively and intense correspondence, and he sent me so many documents. It's incredible. He is the researcher. He is the prime person. He is the one who's done all this work. All of the scholars I relied on him. I did not know that until a year ago.
Wow.
I mean, I knew that obviously that he had been a good source for them.
Right.
But I did not know that, this has been his fight. But so what was so gratifying, he got the copy, the advanced copy, and he started reading it right away. And he was emailing me 3 and 4 times a day as he would read every few pages. Sometimes he would email me and he'd say, this was exactly what happened to my mother. Or he'd write, how can you know this? I don't, it's so real. He said, I'm there again. I mean, to the point where I began to be afraid, Art was 87, he's probably 88 now. I began to be afraid that this would be too painful for him, too upsetting for him to read this. But he pressed on, and then he was, gracious enough to, offer a statement, because I had read his memoir that he had self-published, a prison called Hohenasperg.
That had to be an amazing feeling, knowing that this person who actually experienced it is saying that this world that you created was so accurate and so true. And I'm sure that there was a weight for you, because this was not a story that you created. This was other people's. Well, yes, you created the story, the characters based on all of this historical fact, and to tell that story in an authentic and not sensational way, like you did. It was very truthful and very honest and very empathetic, and I didn't feel it was manipulative or anything like that, trying to make you feel these things. I actually just felt these things.
Well, and that was always my hope, but you're right, to hear that from someone who lived it. You're right. A tremendous way, so humbling and gratifying. And just grateful, that that he felt, that he took the time, and
Right.
that he could, felt that he could trust me with documents that, that he were very hard won for him. And I have preserved them, very carefully. I have them backed up on multiple, digital platforms, so that, they won't get lost, because, I think one of his greatest fears is that this story will die with him.
Well, it won't, because you've told it, and now you have part of his story to tell. And so even when he passes away, you will still be able to keep his memory alive and the memory of what he went through. And that's a gift that you gave not only to him, but to a generation and to a whole group of people who many may not ever read your book, because most of them have passed away, but they're descendants, they're people, and just Americans, and globally, people who did not know this happened. You have kept this part of history and alive now. You've brought it to the forefront. And that's a gift you've given people.
Well, that's the wonderful thing about books, is that even if they don't get about very much in the year or so after they've been published, they're always there.
Yeah.
You can always find them and always stumble upon them. So
there's a saying I heard about books that book clubs read. I can't remember what it was, but it was something along the lines of, book clubs are great for books, but they're not the best for the books that just came out. They're the best for the books that came out years ago and that are just now being discovered. Or something.
That's a great one. Well, I actually had that experience, with the sisters. I mean, there, I did talk to a lot of reading groups in the first year, but 5, 6, 7 years down the road, I would still get a couple of requests, a year, because people had just bumped into it and they wanted to talk about it. So
how long did it take you to write both books? You had the sisters. How long did that take you?
I think probably, 4 or 5 years for each of them separately. In our midst, a whole year at least was nothing but research. But it's hard to track because, because of my teaching job, I really can only write in the summer.
Okay.
And things will stir around, for the year, but actual writing. And so it's a very slow process for me. The saving grace for me within our midst was just that I could keep doing I could manage research while I was teaching, but not much on the writing. But I don't know, 4 or 5 years from the, the first idea, and like that first little bit, that first summer, I maybe ended the first summer for both of them with 40 or 50 pages and didn't know where I was going to go after that. And of course, a lot of pages get thrown away.
Sure. Many drafts, lots of pages. I didn't ask you what inspired you to write In Our Midst. How did you find out about the story?
Well, actually, while I was, this was very early on when I was writing The Sisters. And it happened because I just happened to give them the name Fisher spelled in the German way. And I grew up in Indiana, and Indiana is, about 40% German ancestry. I don't know about my own very much, we have a Danish side. I'm sure there's some German in there too, because it was Denmark, right on the border. But it wasn't for like any particular feeling. It was just the name, that came to me. And I kind of had the idea of of the year, because I was kind of basing it on my grandmother's childhood, an approximate age where I put her. And so I had an idea that maybe part of the backstory of the Fisher family was that they had been merchants and that they had been caught up in anti-German hysteria during the First World War. And so I was just exploring the backstory. And so, went to our good friend Google and just, again, this was one of those, I want to check to see if I remember what I think I remember from history. And so I put in anti-German hysteria and, World War I, and, you know, there were a couple of things that popped up, but then there was a site that popped up, and it was, I started reading, and I said, this is World War II. And I couldn't believe it. And in fact, it was Art Jacobs' website.
Okay.
And you know, I mean, it's not a slick design by any means. And in fact, I actually thought, this is fake. This is a fake website.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, I really initially I thought, this didn't happen. This is not true. And then I started chasing down a few references and realized, oh my God, it is. But then I had this other book that was moving along, and I just put that aside. It was in the back of my mind. And I think I probably did forget about it for a couple of years. But then, you know, when I finished The Sisters and I was kind of casting about, I had my mother had given me some diaries that had belonged to my step great grandfather. And they were just fun and interesting because they were really kind of mundane diaries for the most part, but they partly covered the courtship of my great grandmother, who, you know, when he had met her. And so I was trying to put the story together. And so I actually thought that I was going to, and this was like right at World War II. And so I actually thought that I was going to write a home front story about this love affair between elderly people. And then I remembered, you know, what I had read about, you know, the German Americans. And so I thought, well, there'll be characters. And then it was the German American family story just took over. It just took over, and I couldn't ignore it. Mm-hmm. And it was, and so then I started plunging into research. So that original couple, you know, in vastly altered form became Iris and Mr. Beale.
Okay.
Because, you know, Mr. Beale in my mind is just like, you know, my step great. I have like two photographs of him, and he's tall and very dashing. And my grandmother spoke of him as being just an incredibly gentle man and very, you know, very kind. So, you know, they lived on, but in vastly different form. Iris has no resemblance to the original woman that I had in mind. Of course, she's much younger than he is too. So. Yeah,
that's really cool. It was probably, well, I know some people first found out about the German internment through your book within our members. Some had found out with Susan Meisner's The Last Year of the War.
Yeah, and that came out when I was actually finished Within Our Midst. I mean, my mm-hmm. agent was going to start to shop it, I think, when that came out, you know, because we both like,
yeah, of course. But the majority of people don't know until the last year or so that they've read these books. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing how we haven't heard that much about it. That and you alluded to that earlier, that it was kind of like hushed up, kind of hidden mm-hmm. up, hidden, excuse me. We hear like George Takei from the original Star Trek. He was in a Japanese internment camp mm-hmm. Somewhere in the West. But I've never heard of others coming forward and saying my relatives were, or something like that. Do you think that there was an element, because it wasn't as big, that there were two things maybe at factor, like that the country wanted to hush it up because it was not something that looked great, but also that maybe there was the people who were actually living through that might have felt shamed by it, that they didn't want to tell the story, that it was this horrible experience that they just didn't want to tell.
There are kind of all those things going on at once. You know, like in George Takei's case, I mean, his family was interned under the War Relocation Act, mm-hmm. which was different from the presidential proclamations that sprang, that resulted in arrests of Germans, Italians, and Japanese for, you know, as potentially dangerous enemy aliens. So, those, there were like the Japanese who are at Fort Lincoln with Otto and Kurt, the ones who appear there. Those are men who were arrested in a similar way with him, plucked out of communities. So, part of what is happening here is because of the War Relocation Act, families went together. Whole communities went together. I mean, they went with their neighbors. And so that was, that I think spurred them to keep the story alive and to say, how are we going to tell this story afterwards? And they kept in touch with each other. And, there was a group, not everybody agreed, of course. There were a lot of conflicts. Some people wanted to be repatriated, others not. But I think just the fact that they were always kind of tightly together, because actually the Japanese also had to sign secrecy oaths when they left.
Okay.
Whether, I'm not sure about the war relocation. I think they had to sign, oaths not to speak about the conditions of the camp. But that was also much harder for the public to deny, because, whole neighborhoods had been cleared out, whole cities. Whereas, the Germans, and to a lesser extent, the Italians, this all came out of Hoover's custodial detention index, and informants, and people were plucked, here and there. And in some cases, like, there were families like my family where, more than one member of the family was taken up. But that in itself was fairly rare. That there might be, there were voluntary internments, like Nina voluntarily interns herself. So yeah, there was that. And certainly just among Germans, and Art Jacobs has corroborated this for me several times. And, I found that too in the interviews that I read, came up and up, that that the Germans in particular were so ashamed that there was a feeling that they must have done something. They didn't know what it was, but they must have, or they'd be too ashamed that they hadn't made, that they couldn't tell their families. And then some of them, it was real fear. I mean, after what they had gone through, they really were afraid. Yeah. I mean, they were basically told, we'll come and get you again if you speak about this. And Art has written a poem, and it became, was recorded as a folk song. I don't know how widely distributed, but he said, for decades, I mean, he said it wasn't until like late 1970s, so 30 years beyond, and he's a man in his 40s going on 50. And he said, before I stopped fearing the knock on the door, literally just the knock on the door, like any knock unexpected would just clutch his heart. And, trying to make, I mean, and he was out and open about it, and talking about this, but he had people, when he first started doing his research, he had people just flat tell him this didn't happen. And he said, did I dream this? I mean, how, because he was 13. Well, he was like about 11 when his family was interned, and 13 when he was in a prison in Germany after the family had been repatriated. So, I mean, he said he really went through a period where he thought, am I insane? Do I not really truly remember what happened to me? It was kind of a 1984 scenario, like with Winston, who can't trust his own memory because, all of the information goes down the memory hole. As soon as the government wants to change it, it goes down the memory hole. And when you don't have written or photographic evidence, how do you corroborate your own memory? And, and so it was really the Freedom of Information Act in the 90s that, opened up the documents. And the documents aren't complete, but there are enough of them, that, that what people remembered or what their ancestors, discovered, their children maybe discovered in attics, they could finally find some information about the things mom and dad didn't talk about. And of course, a lot of people were repatriated. And so then part of the story gets lost there too. Yeah. So all of these things contribute. And
a lot.
That's the thing when I really realized, that this family wasn't letting go of me. It's like, I have to tell this story because it's a story that's not being told. And that sense of things became more urgent the more I learned.
Sure.
About it.
Well, you've definitely educated a lot of people, and you've provided a book that will educate people going forward and give them something that they can learn from. During the writing process, which would have taken place recently, in the course of like things coming to light about families being separated at the border and things like that, were those kind of concepts that are happening now in your head while you were writing things at all? I can see a parallel, but I don't know if that was something that you were.
Yeah, I was thinking when I first was working on it, I was thinking mostly of the prisoners languishing in Guantanamo Bay.
We talked about that at book club.
That was because when I started, that's what was present.
Okay.
And I think the book was done. I mean, there were some revisions and things when the family separation started happening, but it was very upsetting to me because then I'm like screaming like, why won't a publisher pick up this book? It was like too disturbing. But, I do remember, I was finishing up, but I do remember very vividly when candidate Donald Trump spoke about immigrants and spoke about interning immigrants. And I felt, I was standing in my living room and I heard the speech and like wheel around and, and no media that I could find actually picked up that sentence from the speech. And I couldn't, because he went on and on about it. He's like, oh, well, it'll be done humanely, and it's just like, it's like nobody's freaking out about this because at that point that was in the like immigrants are all criminals and drug addicts phase, and so he wasn't talking about necessarily people at the border. He was talking about going through California and just like plucking out brown people, and it didn't get any attention, and I thought I was going to lose my mind. Like how is this happening, and how aren't people recognizing that this is so incredible, this is such a dangerous rhetoric.
I think that there's a difference between patriotism and nationalism that some people don't understand. Yeah. And like when Bess says to Nina, there are other Germans in this town, and she's essentially saying, so you must have done something wrong for this to have happened to your family. That they must have done something wrong. There's that the government, in some ways, there's still that government power that the government is right, and that at times I think can blend from patriotism to nationalism. Yeah, and it's very dangerous because at what point does that stop? Now, luckily, we don't have J. Edgar Hoover in power anymore. Oh, during book club, we were like talking about the interns, and I was like, "What about World War I?" And so I like went to see, and that it turned out that it was J. Edgar Hoover who had been a big part of the internment in World War I too. And I'm like, at age 23, I was like, this is insane. This man set up this whole elaborate thing for decades, and we're still paying for it.
Yeah, as far as scholars can tell, I'm sorry, I'm having to travel through my house because my laptop just told me it's about to run out of battery power. So I'm traveling through my house to plug in my computer, so you won't be able to see me very well from
I'm
here.
just going to quickly say, if anyone has any questions, no one's written anything in the Q&A yet, but if you have any questions, please write them in there because we don't want to take up too much more of Nancy's time.
Oh, I'm happy to go on. I just have to plug this in. But yeah, I mean, scholars know that Hoover started putting that CDI index together years before it was used. That is the custodial detention index. But I mean, at least 5 years, but probably even earlier because of that activity in the First World War. Certainly from the time Hitler was in power. Yeah. So now we get my cats. This is Joey. Hi, Joe. Yeah. Okay.
Hi, Joey.
I'm going to try to get this up on a counter now that I've got it plugged in, or I'll just hold it. So,
whatever you're most comfortable with.
Yeah. So I'm sorry for the terrible lighting now, but
you're fine.
But yeah, it's it's terrifying, and it's terrifying to me, this awareness that in the ways that history repeats itself in slightly different form. And
if we don't know about the history, how do we stop it from happening? That's why history is important. That's like why books like yours are important.
Well, and I think it also requires it requires some imagination to recognize that when history repeats itself, it's not going to come back exactly the same way. You have to think in terms of just like human rights violations don't all look the same. Yeah. And it's not always the same people whose rights are being violated. And it's not always in the same way. And it happens in different degrees, but it happens. My Latina niece, has been stopped. She's a young professional outside of DC, doesn't have a very expensive car, but a nice car. But she's she has brown skin, and she's driving a Toyota, a low end Toyota, several years, and she gets stopped in traffic when other people don't, or she gets, she's aware of police following her, and thank God nothing's happened, but I mean, it's just terrifying, It's terrifying.
And we look at the last year, what the amount of harassment and violence towards Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. There's a question on the reading guide for your book that asks about viewing people as enemies.
Yeah. And
the fact that it's relevant to your book that's set from 1941 to 44, and that we're in the 2000s, yet people still look at others who are different from themselves as enemies. And there's that lack of wanting to get to know people, to find the common ground, to learn from people, to grow that way. That really scares me, that there's such a polarization, and we see it in politics, but we see it in communities as well. It's not just politics, it's not just Republican, Democrat stuff. It's on individual levels, to great extents, in some places to lesser extents. But the lack of progress in, 80 years, it's so sad.
Yeah, I know.
So sad.
It really makes you think about, is tribalism, real tribalism, intrinsically human, and that outside of tribes, do we just find tribes and find, and I don't think it's even so much as finding a tribe, but finding, putting others into a tribe. That's the enemy tribe. And it doesn't matter. What the characteristics are. It's not always race. It's not always culture. I mean, a few years back, I remember, I mean, this was after Trump was elected, having a conversation with a trans woman who was thinking about coming into the graduate program, which I teach, and we just talked for hours, and she said,
One second, that's a good point. Happy Trans Visibility Day, everyone.
Oh, I forgot. Yes, it was. But I remember that she said that she had told a few friends of hers, she said, if I disappear, please investigate, because she was genuinely afraid that trans people were just going to start disappearing off the street. And, and it would just be quiet, and it's just silent. And it would be a while before people began to realize, but by then it would be too late. And I mean, I think I had, we probably went out, I had done a little reading from, in our midst, which was in progress at the time. And I think maybe that's why she opened up to me. But I couldn't tell her that it was impossible.
No.
And it just disturbed me that it is, and, my hackles go up every time I hear a group of people being categorized and painted with the same brush, that everybody in this group, I mean, and even if there are people I disagree with, it still is distressing to me that all people like this think this way, or all people like this are, and they're not. And, even just the journey to publication for In Our Midst, I mean, it ran into a lot of, barriers, because some editors felt like the ousts needed to choose a side. They couldn't be German if they didn't want to be Nazi. And I just they wanted people, I mean, some opened up the door to my changing that, and it's like, no, that's part of the point. This is their culture, this is their homeland. They don't have anything to do with Hitler. Because it would just, for me, it was like, okay, because we're Americans, does that mean we're all on Trump's side? That we, believe in all of his policies, and like, nobody would say that.
Or any elected official you could throw in there. Like,
yeah, and so it's like, how, I'm not there. It was that assumption that Nazism was fundamentally German. That there was this, that these were synonyms, not not qualities that happen to coexist in some cases. And but I still see it. I still and it goes, I mean, if we don't have the evidence in the attacks on Asian people, I don't know what evidence is. I mean, and it's been the same, Muslims, and I mean, any, after 9/11, just, because, Americans would have difficulty distinguishing one Southeast Asian person from another. Anybody who looked, I mean, it's like, I remember going to a Halloween party. I was, living way down south in Kentucky, and I was on my way to a Halloween party, and all I'd had was a sari that I had, when I, an Indian friend had given me when I lived in Malaysia. And so, I put on some, colorful scarves, and I decided I was going to go to this party as Salome. And so I was all decked out and driving across this mountain in Kentucky, and realized that I was being followed by someone in a truck who was looking at, like, if I had to stop her, I know that I would not have survived that trip. As pale as my skin is, because basically I had some scarves arranged over my head. And so I guess, I mean, he saw something in there, and I was petrified. And as I was driving, I was trying to loosen some of the scarves and let them fall and everything, but he had already made up his mind.
It's scary. It's scary that there's people, like you said, that didn't believe that something had happened, that and I
Well,
think the best,
there are 9/11 deniers, there are
yes,
Holocaust deniers. I mean, yeah.
I think it's
And
just
some of them are in Congress.
I think it's important that we continue to learn, and books give us such an incredible path to do that. And I will be sharing your book with everyone, but especially people who want to learn more about things about World War II that they haven't learned, but how they can possibly be important and relevant now.
Thank you. Well, I have to give props to my agent, who, when she read the final manuscript, or what was almost the final manuscript, she's the one who suggested the historical note. She said, I know, and she said, but I want to make sure that anybody who picks up this book knows this is not alternative history or speculative history, like the Philip Roth book, like if Lindbergh had been, elected president. She said, I want people to know absolutely that this is not made up, that while it's fiction, this event happened. And she was right. I mean, I think I was really grateful, that she had that insight.
Yeah. It's there's a lot of people who can't tell the difference between truth or fact and fiction. And
yeah, which I find what's so ironic is that so many readers think that every work of fiction is based on, like real experience. Like I have people who ask me about the sisters, and it's like, wow, that happened to you, and it's like,
which one are you?
Yeah, or yeah. Well, I mean, I had a woman lean across the table to me in a book club, and I think she was sitting next to me. She put her hand on my arm. She said, "I'm so sorry you had to endure sexual abuse," and she said, it's so powerful that you were able to write about that and free yourself. And I said, that did not happen to me. And she said, but I had to, because how could you write it if you hadn't lived it? Yeah. And
that's when the adage, write what you know, gets people in trouble, because not everybody writes what they know.
It's so strange to me, though, but that this could happen, that that story could be taken for real, while here's something that really did happen to people, not me. That could be saying, okay, well, this is invented. This is a what if kind of story. This is a what if history. No. Yeah. So it's I don't understand, how those, and it's not necessarily the same people, I suppose, who are thinking these things. But,
well, I hope that many more people read this wonderful book. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us tonight. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Oh, me too.
And I know that you've given a lot of people things to think about, and I appreciate that. If you haven't read the book, anyone, please read the book. It's beautiful. When we started book club yesterday, one of our members just said, I laughed, or I cried, I was angry. Like she was just talking about how much emotion this book made her feel. And I think all of us who read it feel that way. It's not easy at times. But it's important, and it's a beautifully told story. So thank you.
Thank you. I cried a lot reading it. It was very painful to me. And there are passages that I can't read in public.
I would imagine.
I really can't. Yeah. So I appreciate that. I mean, it's a weird thing to say. Oh, I'm so glad I made you cry.
No, it meant that you touched us.
That's what writing
you connected
is.
with us, and that's.
But yeah, I mean, anybody. I know there are apparently not any questions, from the group, but my email address is through my website.
If you give me 1 second, I'm just going to pop that up. Actually, for those who want to see the cover of the book, this is the book in our midst, and then here is Nancy's website, and then her Facebook, so you can connect with her there.
Yeah, and I'm just really, happy to hear from readers, or if somebody has a question, just hook up with me some way in there, and
and then I'm
happy to do it.
Quickly thank everyone for coming. Thank you so much, Nancy, for being here and sharing your insight and educating us even more about this forgotten period of history that's so important. For those of you who haven't visited our website lately, take a look. We are constantly adding things. We have new giveaways starting tomorrow. So if you haven't participated in any of our bookish giveaways, go check it out, win a book. And then keep an eye on our upcoming events, because we have more author talks in the futures, as well as panels and things coming up. So we hope you'll join us. Thank you so much, Nancy.
Thank you for having me. You know, I wish we could go out for lunch tomorrow.
I know, right?
Where you are.
I'm outside of Philly. So
Okay.
sometime post-pandemic, I hope to get to Kentucky, because I want to do the bourbon crawl. I want to go to the Louisville Slugger.
Well, I'm just a
factory,
few 20 miles away from the Bourbon Trail. So
I'll
let
you
me
know, and hopefully we can meet sometime.
Yeah, but thank you. I mean, it just feels, it's like, I can't believe how much time has passed. So
I know.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being generous with your time.
Thanks for having me again. I appreciate it. And thanks for reading the book.
Of course. All right. Have a good night, everyone. Bye.
Good night.